Tonight, I am going to continue talking about the book Single Sufficient Virtue. To begin with, I want to review what was covered in the last class. So, this is a quote from the text by Kalu Rinpoche. If you don't actually gain decisive resolution about this through contemplating these four thoughts that turn the mind, if you don't turn your mind away from this delusion and denial about samsara, then all your Dharma practice and meditation won't really matter, because your craving for and fixation on samsara will just increase. Your state of mind, your personality, your behavior will just get worse. You will become tougher, harder, more rigid, instead of less so. Therefore, this is the ground for all our practice and is indispensable. Nothing else that we do will actually work if this ground is not present. The reason why I'm reading this is, well, the book is called The Single Sufficient Virtue. You need to do a lot of things in order to actually have that single sufficient virtue be effective. In a way, you could say that calling it a single sufficient virtue is a little bit misleading. And so what we have to do is contemplate and understand these four thoughts that draw our mind to the Dharma and away from samsaric diversions. And they are precious human birth, impermanence, and how karma works, the law of karma. And also, the fourth one is that there's really no satisfactory place in samsara to hang out. Going back to that long quote that I read, the reason we don't progress is that we lack the desire to be free. We want it both ways. We want to be attached to samsara. We want to free ourselves from samsara. In the previous book that we covered, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, Trungpa Rinpoche talked about the importance of surrendering. And that is what is being talked about here. It's surrendering to the Dharma, understanding that we have to let go of samsara. Compassion for yourself is actually expressed in renunciation of the causes of suffering. So this desire for freedom from samsara has a understanding of renunciation, or an element of renunciation. It also includes an understanding of the three types of suffering and their causes. And then you have a much clearer idea of what to renounce. Actually, Sunday I covered the three forms of suffering, and they are the all-pervasive suffering, the suffering of change, and suffering of suffering. So when we come to understand this and develop true renunciation, a renunciation that is not just lip service, that is not just, well, I know this, and then you behave as if you don't know it. When we really, at a very deep level, develop renunciation, letting go, and so forth, then we become capable of practicing these profound instructions. And these are Khenpo Karta Rinpoche's words. Quote, once we are on the path in that way, then lifetime after lifetime we will improve. And after achieving Buddhahood ourselves, we will continue to come back for the benefit of others. So this is what bodhisattvas have done, and many of these bodhisattvas are present in the world today, and they help us and assist us travel the path. Rinpoche mentions in the book that bodhisattvas can appear as bodhisattvas, they can appear as ordinary beings, or even as animals. We talked about this a little bit in a previous class. So a bodhisattva can choose how they want to appear, how they want to emanate, and they can have many emanations at the same time. They are superior beings and have abilities that us ordinary beings do not have. Now, there are other practices that need to be done. Again, we need to have a good foundation. I already talked about the contemplating the four thoughts that turn one's mind to the Dharma. After that, there is Nundro. the long title of Nundro is that which goes before or precedes Mahamudra. And it consists of going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. It includes purification in the Vajrasattva practice. You accumulate merit through the mandala offering practice. And finally, then you have Guru Yoga, which cultivates devotion for the Guru. Other practices that a person can do is the 7 points of mind training, which helps develop compassion for all beings. And then, of course, reciting liturgies or sutras, meditating on deities, reciting mantras, and so forth. All of these are necessary. This is not an all or nothing situation that different people will progress differently due to their karma and will progress at different speeds. Students of the same teacher will progress differently. So this is important, that much of this depends on the student. It's easy to sometimes think, well, I just need to have the right teacher, and then that will take care of my problem of lack of progress, or there's such similar thoughts. If we're going to practice Mahamudra, the starting point is this sincere desire for freedom, and then completing these practices that have just been discussed. Rinpoche gave Mahamudra instructions in 3-year retreat, but before you could apply for the 3-year retreat, you had to complete Nundro, and then Nundro was the first practice we did when the retreat started. Rinpoche defines Mahamudra this way. Mahamudra is simply a term for letting your mind be what it already is without attempting to change or alter it in any way. End quote. He then mentions some sidetracks that we need to avoid. One is trying to place your mind in a state of stillness. We don't try to create a state of stillness. We just let the mind come to rest by itself. He says, do not focus on somewhere inside of you. And likewise, do not focus on somewhere outside of you. Don't speculate. Don't engage in attempting to maintain an idea. Rinpoche calls this, quote, the fake meditation of mental engagement, end quote. Don't space out. By that, I mean don't become unconscious or blissed out, where there really is no awareness present. Here is another quote of Rinpoche's. If you let your mind rest of itself in its own way, you will find that your mind's capacity to be aware of itself is still there, end quote. Or when he says you will find, it means that you will experience, direct experience. Mahamudra is about direct experience. It's not about conceptualization, thoughts, ideas. And when you can just let your mind rest in its own way, its ability to recognize what is will be undiminished. It will be unimpeded when your mind comes to this natural rest. And with this natural rest will be this inherent recognition of our mind's nature. We will see directly our mind's nature. The problem why we don't experience this is that we want to or expect the mind to be something. We want it to be extraordinary. We want to have a now I got it moment, whereas the mind is nothing, it is empty. There's nothing there, there's nothing to see, there's no object of recognition. The mind isn't made out of matter. As a result, it's not established. You can't define it as one thing or another. You can't say this about it or that about it. You can't say it is this or it is not this. In other places, Rinpoche talked about the teachings being like the finger pointing at the moon. And if you're going to see the moon, you have to let go of looking at the finger. The teachings are just pointing you in the direction where you can experience directly this nature of your mind without embellishment. He also talked about having experienced it, you are like a person that cannot talk, who is mute, that has tasted sugar, and they know they have tasted sugar, but they can't say anything about it because they're unable to talk. Now I'm going to go back to a quote of his on page 3. The Dharmakaya is our mind's emptiness. The Sambhogakaya is our mind's cognitive lucidity. And the Nirmanakaya is our mind's acute awareness that cuts through the embellishment and delusion. So this lucidity, this clarity, sometimes they also talk about luminosity, that it is active, it radiates, it's not reflective. The sun radiates, the moon reflects. The moon does not radiate. It's unable of creating light. It just reflects the light of the sun. So there is this idea of luminosity. The Dharmakaya is formless. Other people aren't aware of the Dharmakaya other than through their personal experience. But if you experience the Dharmakaya, since its emptiness, potential, and so forth, you experience it for your own benefit. The Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya are considered form bodies, and they are luminous and they radiate for the benefit of others. But their source is the Dharmakaya. It's not that they're three separate bodies. So going back to the emptiness of the Dharmakaya, it is this utter absence of substance. It is potential. Anything can arise. The Dharmakaya is the undiminished capacity to recognize itself, even though there is nothing to recognize. I remember having a conversation with a man at KTD, another student of Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, and he talked about, I looked at my mind and I saw nothing. And I answered back, well, who is looking? And that is this idea about the Dharmakaya. There is no one looking. There is just this awareness, this recognition, but there's no one recognizing it. Khenpo Karta Rinpoche very simply says the mind's ability to recognize itself. Another way to put it is awareness that there is awareness. This unceasing self-recognition is the Nirmanakaya. This recognition is always there. Awareness is always there. This recognition with no object of recognition. So the question is, are you aware of it or not? It's not like sometimes it's there and sometimes it isn't. It is, are you aware of it? He then goes on to talk about the Sambhogakaya. And the Sambhogakaya includes the awareness of this constant recognition of one's mind, awareness of the emptiness of one's mind, and then realizing that they are inseparable. Quote, the mind's self-recognition ability, the mind's emptiness, and the mind's lucidity are not different things. That transparent awareness is the inseparability of the mind's emptiness, and its self-recognition is the Sambhogakaya. Again, all of this is just words. They're very eloquent words. They are amazingly simple, even though they are eloquent. Rinpoche is pointing out to us what to look for, what to investigate, and direct experience leads to understanding all of this. Next in the book, he talks about the moving mind. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. He starts out by saying, quote, none of this mental activity really exists anywhere, end quote. There's no place where this activity occurs, that it's just mental activity. It's not real. And this includes our sensory perception. This is very difficult to understand but I'm going to try to demonstrate this. Some of you have seen me use this example in the past. So this is a very famous painting by René Magritte. Michel, why don't you speak the French properly?
Ceci n'est pas une pipe.
Okay, in English, that is, this is not a pipe.
Correct.
And the artist, his commentary on this was, this is a picture of a pipe. You cannot fill it, meaning with tobacco, light it and smoke it. It's merely a picture. And the word pipe is there. You cannot fill and smoke the word pipe. And you cannot fill and smoke the thought pipe. Think about it as much as you like, you can't do it because it has no real existence. And so it is with all of our thoughts. They're just thoughts. They are not real. Another way to look at this is if you're hungry, well, think about a wonderful feast you had one time. If that was real, I believe that would satisfy your hunger. So the point being, we think that our thoughts are real. We think that our sensory perceptions are real. Here is another quote from the book of Rinpoche's words, that movement of thought, whether it is of the imagination, of concepts, the retention of sensory images, and so forth, that unceasing movement of thought, that is the natural content of awareness, is the Nirmanakaya. Their non-existence is the Dharmakaya. So that seems pretty clear that their non-existence is the Dharmakaya. The point here is to be aware of the true nature of thoughts, that they are empty. You can think, you can imagine, you can manipulate thoughts, but there is no inherent reality. They appear, they dwell, and then they vanish. On the other hand, emptiness doesn't negate appearances. It doesn't mean that they don't appear. This is a very important point. Yes, they appear. We become aware of them. And it's not a problem for thoughts to arise in our minds. It literally, thought is the play of the mind. Another quote from the book here, the absence of true existence of thoughts and the images are the same thing. If they had true existence, they could not unceasingly appear. End quote. So these thoughts, they keep coming, new thoughts, old thoughts, or thoughts that seem like old thoughts because we've been thinking them over and over again, but every thought is new as it arises. It's the play of the mind. And even when the mind is moving, it still is the three kayas, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. So all that we need is to recognize our mind, whether it's moving or still. Seeing the true nature of the moving mind, you realize that it is no different than the still mind, that this self-recognition of mind, Rinpoche calls it instantaneous present awareness, or awareness of the present moment. He also refers to this being ordinary mind. I am going to turn to a definition of ordinary mind by Jamgon Khantrul III. Ordinary mind is a state which nothing is beyond, and it is beyond everything. There is nothing to be abandoned in ordinary mind. There is nothing to be taken up. There is nothing that one could be without in ordinary mind. One has always had ordinary mind. Therefore, you cannot attain it. What you can do is recognize it. The question is, how important is the lineage, and how important is it to relate to one teacher? Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, when he was alive, he would always tell his students, Gyalwang Karmapa is your root guru. And this was even before the 17th Karmapa was recognized and enthroned. But it's excellent to look at Galwan Karmapa as your root guru. And again, going back to what I had talked about in a previous class, the source of blessings, the source of siddhi, and the source of activity, the three roots, the guru, the yidam, and the protector, as well as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Now, in a broader view, there are other teachers in the Kagyu lineage that teach Mahamudra. What is most important is the devotion of the student for the guru. That's what makes it work. If you don't have that devotion, if you don't have surrendering to the guru, it doesn't work. Finally, there are other traditions that are similar to Mahamudra. One is the Great Perfection, which comes from the Nyingma tradition, and the Galupas have the Great Middle Way. It is said if you realize one, you realize all. It's not like there are three different systems. They're all leading towards recognition of ordinary mind that has always been there from the beginningless beginning.